The gentle buzz of an alarm clock broke through the silence of a small apartment on the outskirts of Atlanta. It was 3:30 a.m., and while most of the city remained wrapped in peaceful slumber, one woman was already beginning her day. Rose Williams slowly pushed back her worn quilted blanket, careful not to make any noise that might wake her sleeping teenagers in the next room. The dim light from her bedside lamp cast soft shadows across her tired but determined face. At 45 years old, Rose had learned that life rarely went according to plan, but she never let that stop her from moving forward. She quietly made her way to the bathroom, splashing cold water on her face to chase away the last remnants of sleep. Her morning routine was a well-rehearsed dance: brush teeth, wash face, pull her hair back neatly, and change into her light blue nursing assistant uniform. She'd ironed it the night before, just as she did every evening, making sure to keep up appearances despite her circumstances. Her mama had always taught her that presentation matters, especially in tough times. In the kitchen, Rose prepared a simple breakfast of instant oatmeal and coffee. She needed the energy for what lay ahead. As she ate, she glanced at the family photos decorating her small refrigerator, her children's school pictures, a snapshot from last Christmas, and an old photo of her parents. These faces were her motivation, her reason for pushing forward no matter what obstacles life threw her way. She packed her lunch with practiced efficiency: a peanut butter sandwich, an apple, and a few crackers. Money was tight, but she made sure to leave enough food in the pantry for her kids' breakfast and lunch. Her daughter was responsible enough to make sure her younger brother ate before school. Before leaving, Rose peeked into her children's bedroom. Her 16-year-old daughter and 14-year-old son were sound asleep. She resisted the urge to kiss their foreheads, knowing they needed their rest. Instead, she whispered a quiet prayer for their safety and success, just as she did every morning. The digital clock on the microwave read 3:55 a.m. as Rose shouldered her bag and opened her front door. The pre-dawn air was crisp and cool, carrying the scent of approaching autumn. She took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and began her journey. The streetlights cast pools of yellow light on the empty sidewalks as Rose started her walk. Her comfortable nursing shoes made soft scuffing sounds against the concrete, the only noise in the quiet neighborhood. She'd chosen these shoes carefully from the clearance rack at the local store, knowing they needed to last. 6 months ago, her life had been different. Her old Toyota had finally given up after years of loyal service, sputtering to a stop on her way home from work. The mechanic's estimate might as well have been $1 million. There was no way she could afford the repairs on her modest salary. With rent, utilities, food, and her children's needs, every penny was already accounted for. Some people had suggested she look for work closer to home or try to find a different job. But Rose knew better. Her position at Sunshine Haven Assisted Living Facility wasn't just a job, it was a calling. For 8 years, she'd cared for the elderly residents there, learning their stories, helping them maintain their dignity, and becoming part of their extended family. The thought of abandoning them felt wrong, especially when many had no regular visitors of their own. So she made the choice to walk. 15 miles to work, 15 miles back home. Some people might have called it crazy, but Rose saw it as doing what needed to be done. She'd always taught her children that commitment matters, that you don't give up when things get hard. How could she teach that lesson if she wasn't willing to live it herself? The first mile was always the easiest. Her body was fresh and her mind was clear. She used this time to plan her day, thinking about which residents might need extra attention. There was Mr. Chen, who had been feeling under the weather lately, and Mrs. Rodriguez, who always struggled with homesickness at this time of year. Rose made mental notes to spend a little extra time with each of them. As she walked along the empty roads, she noticed how the city changed around her. From her modest neighborhood, through industrial areas, past small businesses still hours away from opening, and finally into the more affluent part of town where the assisted living facility was located. It was like watching a slideshow of American life, all within her daily commute. The sound of occasional cars passing by didn't bother her anymore. In the beginning, each passing vehicle had made her nervous, especially in the darker areas of her route. But over time, she'd learned which roads were safer, where the best lighting was, and how to stay alert without being afraid. Sometimes she'd catch her reflection in the darkened windows of closed shops. Her uniform neat and clean, her head held high, her pace steady and purposeful. These glimpses reminded her that dignity isn't about circumstances, it's about how you carry yourself through them. Around the halfway point of her morning journey, Rose would usually see the first hints of dawn breaking over the city. The sky would begin to lighten, changing from black to deep blue, then to softer shades as the sun prepared to make its appearance. She'd grown to love this time of day, this quiet moment when the world seemed to hold its breath before awakening. She'd learned to find beauty in these early morning hours. The way dewdrops caught the first rays of sunlight, the sound of birds beginning their morning songs, the peaceful emptiness of usually busy streets. These simple pleasures helped make her long walk more bearable. As she walked, Rose often thought about her own mother, who had cleaned houses and offices for 30 years to give her children a better life. She'd never complained, never made excuses, just got up every day and did what needed to be done. Now, Rose was walking the same path of sacrifice and determination, hoping to provide opportunities for her own children. The morning traffic would begin to pick up as she neared her destination. More cars on the road, more people starting their day. Some drivers had become familiar with her presence over the months, offering friendly waves as they passed. These small gestures of acknowledgement helped remind her that she wasn't alone in her journey. Despite the physical challenges of her long walk, Rose never let it affect her appearance or her attitude when she arrived at work. She'd gotten good at timing her pace, so she could take a few minutes in the staff bathroom to freshen up before her shift. A quick wash of her face, a careful check of her uniform, and she was ready to greet her residents with the warm smile they'd come to expect. What none of her co-workers or residents knew was the journey she made every day to be there. Rose never mentioned it, never complained about her situation. As far as she was concerned, this was simply what needed to be done, and there was no point in drawing attention to it. Her grandmother had always said that true strength isn't about making noise, it's about getting things done quietly and with grace. Little did Rose know that her quiet determination had caught someone's attention. A local police officer had begun to notice her regular presence on his patrol route, and his curiosity about her story would soon lead to unexpected changes in her life. But for now, she was focused on what she did every day, showing up, giving her best, and taking life one step at a time. Life has a way of testing us when we least expect it, and for Rose Williams, that test came in the form of a sputtering engine on a rainy Tuesday evening 6 months ago. She still remembered the moment clearly, the strange noise from under the hood, the way her faithful old Toyota shuddered, and then nothing. Just silence on a busy street as cars rushed past her broken-down vehicle. That night, she'd managed to get a ride home from a kind coworker, trying to hide her worry behind a brave smile. Her children were waiting at home, homework spread across their small kitchen table, and she didn't want them to see her fear. Her son had looked up from his math problems, asking innocently, "Mom, where's the car?" The next day's mechanic visit had confirmed her worst fears. The engine needed major repairs. The cost was more than 3 months' rent. Rose sat in the cramped waiting room, staring at the estimate paper in her hands, the numbers swimming before her eyes. Her mind raced through possible solutions, a loan, a payment plan, maybe selling some furniture. But deep down, she knew none of these were realistic options. Her salary at Sunshine Haven Assisted Living Facility covered the basics, rent, utilities, food, and her children's school needs, but left little room for savings. The last of her emergency fund had gone to her daughter's dental work 2 months earlier. She'd been meaning to build it back up, but there was always something. School supplies, growing kids needing new clothes, the rising cost of groceries. That evening, she sat at her kitchen table long after her children had gone to bed, surrounded by bills and budget notebooks. The numbers didn't lie. There was no way to make the car repairs work without putting her family at risk of missing rent or going hungry. Her daughter's college fund, small as it was absolutely off limits. Rose had promised herself she'd give her children the education opportunities she never had. The solution came to her gradually, like a photograph developing in her mind. The distance to work was 15 miles each way. She'd been trying to get more exercise anyway, she thought with a hint of gallows humor. Walking would take about 4 hours each way, but if she left early enough. The idea seemed crazy at first, but the more she thought about it, the more it felt like her only option. Her first walking commute was an adventure in trial and error. She'd left too late and gotten lost twice, arriving at work sweaty and flustered. But Rose was nothing if not adaptable. Each day, she refined her route, learned which streets to avoid, discovered shortcuts through neighborhoods, and figured out the best times to leave. Her body protested at first, blisters formed and muscles ached, but gradually she grew stronger. The hardest part wasn't the physical challenge. It was keeping the truth from her children. She told them she was carpooling with coworkers, not wanting them to worry or feel guilty about their family's situation. Her daughter, observant and caring like her mother, sometimes gave her questioning looks when she left so early or came home so late, but she never pressed the issue. Rose found unexpected blessings in her new routine. Walking gave her time to think, to plan, to pray. She noticed things she never had before, the way certain houses always had fresh flowers in their windows, how the neighborhood cats had their own morning routines, the changing colors of the sky as seasons shifted. She started carrying a small notebook to jot down her observations, something to share with her residents who couldn't go outside much anymore. Her work at the assisted living facility took on new meaning too. Many of her elderly residents had their own stories of overcoming hardship, of making do with what they had. Mrs. Chen often told stories about walking miles to school as a girl in rural China. Mr. O'Brien spoke about working 3 jobs to put his kids through college. Their resilience inspired Rose to keep going, even on days when her feet felt like lead and the weather turned against her. The weather became both enemy and teacher. Summer brought scorching heat that had Rose carrying extra water and leaving even earlier to avoid the worst of the sun. Autumn rains meant wearing a plastic poncho and carrying a change of clothes in her bag. As winter approached, she invested in warm layers from the thrift store, knowing she couldn't afford to miss work due to cold weather. Her coworkers at Sunshine Haven had no idea of her daily journey. Rose took pride in arriving each day looking professional and put together, always ready with a smile for her residents. She'd gotten good at timing her arrival, so she could use the staff bathroom to freshen up before her shift started. A quick change of socks, a touch-up of her hair, and she was ready to face the day. The residents responded to her unwavering dedication. They noticed how she never called in sick, never arrived late, never complained about her duties. Some days were harder than others, helping Mr. Thompson with his physical therapy, supporting Mrs. Rodriguez during her bad days, keeping up with the endless paperwork, but Rose's commitment never wavered. Her children were thriving despite their challenges. Her daughter had made the honor roll again, and her son's basketball team was doing well. They had learned to be more independent, helping with household chores and looking out for each other while their mom worked long hours. Rose's heart swelled with pride when her daughter's teacher called to praise her leadership qualities in class. Sometimes, on her long walks home, Rose would dream about the future. She imagined her daughter walking across a college graduation stage, her son growing into a strong, responsible man. These dreams kept her feet moving forward, even when exhaustion crept in or doubt tried to take hold. She remembered her own mother's words, "Life will knock you down, baby, but it's how you get back up that matters." The broken-down Toyota still sat in their apartment complex parking lot, covered in leaves and early morning dew. Some days, Rose patted its hood as she walked past, thanking it for its years of service. The car had gotten her through a lot of tough times, and even though it couldn't help her anymore, she couldn't bring herself to have it towed away. Maybe someday she'd find a way to fix it, but for now, her feet were her most reliable transportation. None of the passing drivers knew her story. To them, she was just another person on the sidewalk, perhaps someone enjoying an early morning walk. But Rose carried with her the determination of generations of strong women who had faced obstacles and found ways around, through, or over them. Each step was a testament to the quiet strength that comes from choosing to move forward, no matter what. Little did Rose know that her daily journey had caught the attention of someone who would change her life. But for now, she focused on what was in front of her. Another day, another walk, Another chance to show her children that dignity and determination could carry you through life's toughest challenges. Officer David Rodriguez had been patrolling the same route for nearly 7 years, long enough to know every crack in the sidewalk and every flickering streetlight along his beat. The pre-dawn hours were usually quiet, with only the occasional delivery truck or early morning jogger breaking the silence. But over the past few months, something, or rather someone, had caught his attention. It started as a simple observation, a woman in a light blue nursing uniform, walking with purpose through the darkness. At first, he didn't think much of it. Maybe she lived nearby, maybe she was just getting some exercise before work. But as the weeks went by, he began to notice a pattern. She was there every single day, regardless of weather, always at the same early hour, always walking with the same determined stride. One particularly cold morning, as fog rolled through the streets, Officer Rodriguez spotted her familiar figure through the mist. She had added a thick cardigan over her uniform, but her pace hadn't slowed despite the biting cold. He raised his hand in his usual greeting as he drove past, and she responded with a polite nod, just as she always did. But something about that morning was different. Maybe it was the way she pulled her cardigan tighter against the cold, or maybe it was the memory of his own mother, who had worked long hours as a housekeeper to support their family. Whatever it was, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this woman's story. "Central Dispatch, this is Unit 247, he spoke into his radio. "I'm going to do a routine patrol of the east side, following up on some community observations." The dispatcher acknowledged his message, and Officer Rodriguez began his careful surveillance, keeping a respectful distance as he followed the woman's path. He watched as she navigated the city streets with obvious familiarity, choosing well-lit areas where possible, crossing at the safest points. She walked past the closed coffee shops and darkened store windows, past the industrial district with its silent warehouses, and through neighborhoods that were just beginning to stir. What struck him most was her dignity. Despite the early hour and the long walk he was witnessing, she maintained perfect posture, her uniform crisp and neat, her head held high. She reminded him of his grandmother, who used to say that true character shows not in how you handle your successes, but in how you face your challenges. As the sky began to lighten, Officer Rodriguez realized with growing amazement just how far she had walked. He'd been following her for over 3 hours, and she showed no signs of stopping. His trained eye had noticed how she would occasionally flex her fingers or roll her shoulders, small signs of fatigue that she quickly pushed aside. The neighborhoods they passed through told their own story. From the modest apartment complexes where her journey began, through areas that had seen better days, past new developments, and finally into the more affluent part of town where several medical facilities were located. It was like watching a visual representation of the American dream, but in reverse. Someone making their way through different social strata, not for opportunity, but out of necessity. He recognized the moment when she reached her destination, Sunshine Haven Assisted Living Facility. He'd driven past it many times, but had never given it much thought. Now, he watched as she stopped at a public water fountain outside the building, took a few sips, straightened her uniform, and walked through the front doors with her head high and a smile on her face, ready to begin her workday. Officer Rodriguez sat in his patrol car, his coffee long cold and forgotten. His mind was racing with calculations. If this was where she worked, and he'd first seen her miles away, and she did this every day, the realization hit him hard. This woman wasn't just taking a long walk to work, she was walking what must be close to 15 miles, and presumably she would walk the same distance home. He thought about his own commute, the way he sometimes complained about traffic or having to warm up his car in the winter. The woman he'd just followed had walked for hours in the pre-dawn cold, and from what he'd seen, she'd arrived ready to care for others with a smile on her face. The following morning, Officer Rodriguez arrived at his shift earlier than usual. He'd spent a restless night thinking about the woman's journey, and he was determined to understand the full scope of her daily routine. He parked his patrol car in an unobtrusive spot near Sunshine Haven, waiting to see if she would make the return journey home. His patience was rewarded when, just after 4:30 p.m., he spotted her emerging from the building. Despite having worked a full shift after her morning walk, her posture remained upright, though he noticed slight signs of fatigue in her movements. She took a moment to stretch discreetly before beginning her long walk home. The evening journey proved even more challenging to watch. Traffic was heavier, the heat of the day still lingering in the air. She stopped occasionally to take sips from her water bottle, but never for more than a minute. He noticed how she would pick up her pace when passing through certain areas, her awareness of safety evident in every decision. As he followed at a distance, Officer Rodriguez began documenting everything he observed. The total distance, nearly 30 miles round trip. The time invested, roughly 8 hours of walking each day, on top of a full work shift. The various hazards, poorly lit streets, areas with no sidewalks, sections with heavy traffic. It wasn't just impressive, it was overwhelming to consider doing this day after day. He watched her navigate through a particularly busy intersection, waiting patiently for the light to change. A group of teenagers on bikes sped past her, and she simply stepped aside, unfazed. Nothing seemed to ruffle her determination. She reminded him of his own mother, who had faced every challenge with that same quiet strength. Back at the station the next day, Officer Rodriguez began his research. He pulled up public records, trying to understand more about the woman he'd been observing. Her name was Rose Williams, a certified nursing assistant with an impeccable employment record. No criminal history, not even a parking ticket. Just a hardworking mother trying to make ends meet. He discovered that she had been employed at Sunshine Haven for 8 years, earning several employee recognition awards. The facility's online reviews included multiple mentions of a kind-hearted nurse who went above and beyond for her patients. He had no doubt they were referring to Rose. What struck him most was realizing that her incredible journey had been going on for months. Through summer heat waves, spring rains, and early autumn chills. The thought of her walking through all kinds of weather, never missing a day of work, made his throat tight with emotion. One afternoon, he decided to visit Sunshine Haven as part of his community outreach duties. He observed Rose at work through the lobby windows, watching as she helped an elderly resident with his walker, her gentle patience evident in every movement. Despite having walked 15 miles to get there, her energy and compassion showed no signs of depletion. He spoke with some of the other staff members, carefully asking general questions about their work environment and commutes. None of them seemed aware of Rose's situation. "Oh, Rose. She's our angel," one receptionist said. "Always here early, always stays late if needed, never complains about anything." The facility's break room bulletin board caught his attention. Among the notices and schedules was an Employee of the Month photo, Rose's warm smile beaming from the frame. The citation praised her perfect attendance record and dedication to patient care. Officer Rodriguez felt a mix of admiration and sadness, knowing the incredible sacrifice behind that perfect attendance. On his next patrol, he paid special attention to the route she walked. There were several spots where the sidewalk suddenly ended, forcing pedestrians to walk on the road's shoulder. Other areas had poor lighting or overgrown bushes that limited visibility. He began making notes about potential safety improvements that could be submitted to the city council. One morning, he noticed Rose carrying a slightly heavier bag than usual. She stopped at a small grocery store that had just opened, emerging with a loaf of bread and some fruit. Even with the extra weight, she maintained her steady pace. He realized she was probably doing her shopping on foot as well, adding even more walking to her already challenging routine. The more Officer Rodriguez learned, the more he understood that this wasn't just about a long walk to work. This was about a mother's love for her children, about maintaining dignity in the face of hardship, about showing up every day, no matter how difficult the journey. It was about the kind of strength that doesn't make headlines but holds communities together. He began to notice small acts of kindness along her route. A convenience store owner who would have a fresh cup of water waiting for her. An early morning dog walker who always greeted her with a smile. A crossing guard who arrived early to help her safely cross a busy intersection. These people had become part of her story without even knowing its full scope. The weather was starting to turn colder, and Officer Rodriguez worried about the approaching winter. He'd seen Rose adding layers to her uniform, but he knew that walking such long distances in freezing temperatures would be dangerous. Something needed to be done, but he wanted to help in a way that wouldn't compromise her dignity. He thought about his own daughter, now away at college. What would he want someone to do if she were in this situation? How could he make a difference without making Rose feel like a charity case? The answer began to take shape in his mind, but he knew he would need help from the community. That evening, as he watched Rose complete another leg of her journey home, Officer Rodriguez made a decision. This story needed to be shared, not as a tale of hardship, but as an inspiration. He began drafting an email to his supervisor, carefully outlining what he had observed and suggesting a way the department could help. As the sun set over the city, Rose's figure disappeared into the distance, heading home to her children. Officer Rodriguez sat in his patrol car, finalizing his notes. Tomorrow would bring new developments, but for now, he felt privileged to have witnessed such an extraordinary example of human perseverance. Sometimes the biggest heroes were the ones who simply showed up every day, putting one foot in front of the other, never asking for recognition or praise. Officer Rodriguez sat at his desk early one morning, carefully reviewing the email he drafted to his supervisor. He wanted to make sure he got everything right. This wasn't just about reporting a situation, it was about honoring someone's dignity while trying to make a difference. After reading it one final time, he took a deep breath and clicked send. The response came faster than he expected. Within an hour, his supervisor, Captain Thompson, called him into his office. "Tell me more about this woman," the captain said, leaning forward in his chair. As Officer Rodriguez shared his observations, he could see the same amazement he'd felt reflected in his superior's eyes. 30 miles a day, in all weather? Captain Thompson shook his head in disbelief. And she's never missed a day of work. The captain had started his career walking a beat, and he knew exactly how far 30 miles felt on tired feet. He immediately understood why this story had captured Officer Rodriguez's attention. Word spread quickly through the police department. Officers who patrolled different shifts began sharing their own observations. One had seen Rose walking home during a heavy rainstorm, protected only by a thin plastic poncho. Another had noticed her helping an elderly man who had dropped his groceries, despite being visibly tired from her long walk. The local newspaper editor, Mrs. Chen, was having coffee at her usual spot when she overheard two officers discussing Rose's story. As a veteran journalist, she had developed a keen ear for stories that mattered. This wasn't just news, this was a reminder of the quiet strength that held their community together. Mrs. Chen reached out to Officer Rodriguez, asking if he would help her connect with Rose. "We need to be careful," he cautioned. "This isn't about creating a spectacle. It's about showing people what real determination looks like." The editor agreed, understanding that the story needed to be told with sensitivity and respect. When Mrs. Chen finally met Rose at Sunshine Haven, she was struck by the woman's humility. Rose was reluctant to talk about herself at first, not seeing anything extraordinary in what she did. "I just do what needs to be done," she said simply. "My residents need me, and my children need me to keep this job. So I walk." The article Mrs. Chen wrote wasn't just about a woman walking to work. It was about perseverance, about maintaining dignity in challenging times, about showing up every day without complaint. She included quotes from residents at Sunshine Haven who spoke about Rose's unfailing kindness and dedication, never knowing the extraordinary effort it took for her to be there each day. The story ran on a Sunday morning, accompanied by a respectful photograph of Rose in her nurse's uniform, standing proudly outside Sunshine Haven. By Monday, it had been shared thousands of times on social media. Local television stations picked it up, and suddenly Rose's quiet example of determination was inspiring people across the city. Comments flooded the newspaper's website. A high school teacher shared how she'd read the article to her class, using it to discuss perseverance and character. A local business owner wrote about how it made him rethink his own attitudes toward challenges. Parents talked about using Rose's story to teach their children about dedication and hard work. The owner of a local auto repair shop, Mr. Peterson, read the article over his morning coffee and felt tears in his eyes. He thought about his own mother, who had worked multiple jobs to support their family. "This is our chance to pay it forward," he told his staff, already forming a plan to help. A local church group organized a meeting to discuss how they could assist. "It's not about charity," their leader reminded them. "It's about community, about neighbors helping neighbors." They understood that any help offered would need to respect Rose's dignity and independence. At Sunshine Haven, residents spoke proudly about their Rose, sharing stories of her compassion and care. Mrs. Rivera, a retired teacher, recalled how Rose had learned Spanish phrases to help her feel more at home. Mr. Jackson spoke about how she always remembered his grandchildren's names and asked about them. The story reached Lisa Cooper, owner of a successful local car dealership. She had started her business from nothing, working long hours and overcoming countless obstacles. Reading about Rose's daily journey touched something deep in her heart. "This is someone who doesn't quit," she told her staff. "Someone who finds a way, no matter what." Local community organizations began reaching out to Officer Rodriguez, asking how they could help. He carefully vetted each offer, knowing that Rose wouldn't want grand gestures or public attention. "She's not looking for handouts," he explained. "She's looking to take care of her family and her residents with dignity." A group of local business leaders met to discuss creating a community fund, not just for Rose, but for others facing similar challenges. They recognized that Rose's story, while extraordinary, highlighted broader issues about transportation and accessibility in their community. Young people were particularly moved by the story. A group of high school students started a social media campaign called #WalkWithRose, sharing their own stories of overcoming obstacles. College students began volunteering at Sunshine Haven, inspired by Rose's example of service to others. The mayor's office received numerous calls from citizens asking about improving street lighting and sidewalk conditions along Rose's route. What had started as one woman's private journey was sparking conversations about making the city more accessible and safer for everyone. Throughout all this attention, Rose continued her daily walks, maintaining the same quiet dignity that had first caught Officer Rodriguez's attention. She was moved by people's kindness, but remained focused on her priorities, her children, her residents, and doing her job to the best of her ability. As Officer Rodriguez watched the community's response unfold, he felt a deep sense of satisfaction. This wasn't just about helping one person, it was about reminding people of their connection to each other, about the power of community to lift everyone up. What had started with a simple observation during his pre-dawn patrol was growing into something much bigger, something that would change not just Rose's life, but the entire community's understanding of strength, dignity, and perseverance. The morning sun was just beginning to peek over the horizon when Lisa Cooper, owner of Cooper's Auto Sales, arrived at her dealership. She'd been thinking about Rose's story all night, remembering her own struggles as a single mother years ago. Opening her office, she picked up the phone and dialed Officer Rodriguez's number. "I want to help," she told him, "but I want to do it right." They spent an hour discussing how to approach the situation with respect and sensitivity. Lisa wasn't interested in publicity or recognition. She just wanted to make a difference in someone's life, the way others had once helped her. Meanwhile, across town, Mr. Peterson's auto repair shop was buzzing with activity. He and his team had volunteered to inspect Rose's old Toyota, hoping they might find a way to repair it. But after a thorough examination, they confirmed what Rose had already known: the repairs would cost more than the car was worth. That's when Lisa's offer came into play. She had selected a reliable used car from her dealership, not the newest model, but a dependable vehicle with low mileage and a clean service history. "It's the kind of car I wished I'd had when my kids were young," she explained to Officer Rodriguez. The local insurance agency joined in, offering to cover the first year's insurance. The auto repair shop promised to handle all maintenance for the next 2 years. Everything was falling into place, but Officer Rodriguez knew the most challenging part would be presenting this help to Rose in a way that honored her independence and dignity. He decided to approach her during one of her morning walks. Pulling his patrol car alongside her, he rolled down the window. "Mrs. Williams," he called out softly, "do you have a moment to talk?" Rose paused, recognizing the officer who had often waved to her during her journey. Over coffee at a small diner, Officer Rodriguez explained how her daily walk had inspired the community. He told her about Lisa Cooper, about Mr. Peterson's repair shop, about all the people who had been moved by her dedication. Rose listened quietly, occasionally wiping away tears. "I'm not looking for charity," she said firmly, her voice steady despite her emotions. Officer Rodriguez nodded in understanding. "This isn't charity, Mrs. Williams. This is community, neighbors helping neighbors. The same way you help your residents every day." He explained how Lisa had insisted this wasn't a gift, but rather an investment in a valuable community member. The car would need monthly payments, but they would be minimal, structured to be affordable on Rose's salary. This wasn't about handouts. It was about giving her the tools she needed to continue making a difference in others' lives. Rose thought about her children, about the extra hours she could spend with them instead of walking. She thought about being able to pick up extra shifts at work without worrying about walking home in the dark. She thought about her elderly residents who sometimes needed her to stay late or arrive early. "I'll accept," she said finally, "but I want to pay it forward somehow. I need to find a way to help others too." Officer Rodriguez smiled, knowing this response perfectly captured why the community had rallied around her in the first place. The next day, Rose went with Officer Rodriguez to Cooper's Auto Sales. Lisa greeted them warmly, without fanfare or cameras. She had chosen a silver Honda Civic, 5 years old but meticulously maintained. "I drove one just like it when I was starting my business," she told Rose. "It never let me down." Mr. Peterson was there too, ready to explain the car's maintenance schedule and answer any questions. He showed Rose the new tires he'd installed, the fresh oil change, all the small repairs and updates his team had made to ensure the car's reliability. As Rose sat in the driver's seat for the first time, adjusting the mirrors and familiarizing herself with the controls, she felt a surge of emotion. This wasn't just transportation, it was independence, security, and the knowledge that her community cared. The paperwork was simple and straightforward, the payments structured to fit her budget comfortably. Lisa had been adamant about making everything transparent and manageable. "We're not here to create a burden," she explained. "We're here to lift one." That evening, Rose drove home for the first time in months. Her children were waiting on their apartment steps, having been told by Officer Rodriguez to expect a surprise. Their eyes widened as they saw their mother pull up in the silver Civic, tears of joy streaming down their faces as they ran to hug her. The next morning, Rose drove to work, still leaving early but now able to arrive with energy to spare for her residents. The elderly people in her care noticed the change in her immediately. Not that she had ever let her exhaustion show before, but now there was an extra spring in her step. Word spread quietly through the community about the success of their collective effort. No grand ceremonies, no public presentations, just neighbors helping neighbors, exactly as Officer Rodriguez had envisioned. The local newspaper ran a small follow-up story, focusing not on the car itself, but on the way the community had come together. More importantly, Rose's story sparked ongoing changes in the community. The mayor's office accelerated plans to improve street lighting and sidewalks. Local businesses started discussing employee transportation assistance programs. The community fund continued to grow, ready to help others facing similar challenges. At Sunshine Haven, Rose started organizing a volunteer program, coordinating with local students who had been inspired by her story. She was determined to create opportunities for others to serve, to build the same kind of community connections that had helped her. Lisa Cooper and Mr. Peterson found themselves fielding calls from other business owners, asking how they could participate in similar community initiatives. "It's simple," Lisa would tell them. "Just look around. There are heroes walking past us every day. Sometimes all they need is a little support to keep going." Officer Rodriguez watched all of this unfold with quiet satisfaction. During his patrols, he still saw Rose occasionally, now in her silver Civic, often carpooling with co-workers who needed rides. She would wave and smile, both of them knowing that her story hadn't ended with the car. It had simply entered a new chapter, one where determination and community support had combined to create something beautiful. 1 year had passed since Rose Williams first received her silver Honda Civic, and the ripples of her story continued to spread through the community in unexpected ways. On a bright Sunday afternoon, she pulled into the parking lot of Sunshine Haven, arriving early for her shift as usual, but today was different. Today was special. The facility's community room was filled with familiar faces: Officer Rodriguez, Lisa Cooper from the dealership, Mr. Peterson from the auto shop, and dozens of others whose lives had intersected with Rose's journey. They had gathered not just to celebrate the anniversary of her receiving the car, but to launch something bigger: the Step Forward Foundation. Rose stood at the podium, her hands slightly trembling as she looked out at the crowd. Public speaking had never been her thing, but these people weren't strangers. They were family now. "A year ago," she began, her voice steady despite her nerves, I thought I was walking alone. But I wasn't. Even before I knew it, this community was walking beside me. The Step Forward Foundation had grown from a simple idea Rose had shared with Officer Rodriguez months earlier. She wanted to help others facing similar transportation challenges, but in a way that preserved their dignity and encouraged self-sufficiency. The community fund that had started with her story had grown into something much more structured and sustainable. Lisa Cooper had donated a small fleet of used cars from her dealership. Mr. Peterson's shop provided maintenance support. Local businesses contributed gas cards and bus passes. But more importantly, the foundation offered hope and respect along with practical assistance. Rose's daughter, now a high school senior, had become one of the foundation's most passionate volunteers. She coordinated with local students to provide tutoring services at Sunshine Haven, creating a bridge between generations. The elderly residents loved the energy the young people brought to their days, and the students gained wisdom from hearing their life stories. Officer Rodriguez watched from his seat in the back row, remembering those early morning patrols when he'd first noticed Rose walking. He thought about how close he'd come to simply driving past, to accepting what he saw without taking action. Sometimes the biggest changes started with the smallest decisions to pay attention. The foundation had already helped 10 families in similar situations to Rose's. Each case was different, but the approach remained the same: offering support while preserving dignity, creating opportunities for recipients to give back to the community in their own ways. It wasn't charity, it was community building. Rose shared stories of the foundation's first year. There was the young father who could now take his disabled son to therapy appointments, the grandmother who could visit her grandchildren on weekends, the student who could attend evening classes at the community college. Each story represented not just a person helped, but a family's life improved. Mr. Chen, one of Rose's favorite residents at Sunshine Haven, sat in his wheelchair near the front, beaming with pride. He had become one of the foundation's most enthusiastic supporters, sharing wisdom from his own experiences of overcoming obstacles. Sometimes, he often said, the greatest gift is showing someone they're not alone. The local business community had embraced the foundation's mission. Weekly transportation workshops helped people learn basic car maintenance, understand bus routes, and develop backup plans for emergencies. The mayor's office had even created a task force to address transportation barriers in underserved areas of the city. Rose's children sat in the front row, their faces glowing with pride as they watched their mother speak. The extra time she now had with them had made a difference. Her son's grades had improved, and her daughter had been accepted to college with a scholarship. They had learned firsthand that hard times didn't define you, how you handled them did. After the ceremony, people lingered to chat and share refreshments. Rose moved through the crowd, thanking people individually, listening to their stories, and making connections between those who could help each other. She had discovered a gift for bringing people together, for seeing where needs and resources could align. Officer Rodriguez approached her with a warm smile. "Remember when you said you wanted to pay it forward?" he asked. "Look around, you've done that and more." Rose nodded, thinking about how different things were from those pre-dawn walks that now felt like a lifetime ago. The silver Civic sat in the parking lot, no longer just a car, but a symbol of what could happen when a community came together. Rose kept it meticulously maintained, often using it to give rides to co-workers or transport supplies for foundation events. Every mile driven was a reminder of the kindness that had changed her life. As the event wound down, Rose prepared for her evening shift. Her nursing uniform was still crisp, her smile still warm and genuine. The only difference was that now she could focus all her energy on caring for her residents, rather than conserving it for a long walk home. The foundation's office, a small space donated by a local business, had a wall of photographs showing the people they'd helped. But it wasn't the cars or the bus passes that stood out in these pictures. It was the smiles, the restored dignity, the hope in people's eyes. Each photo told the story of someone who, like Rose, had found the strength to keep moving forward. Later that evening, as Rose drove home under a sky painted with sunset colors, she thought about how life's biggest challenges often led to unexpected blessings. Her long walks had taught her about perseverance, but they had also taught her community about itself, about its capacity for kindness, its power to create change, its ability to turn one person's struggle into everyone's triumph. Her old Toyota still sat in the apartment complex parking lot, but now it served a different purpose. Local students were using it as a project in their auto shop class, learning mechanical skills while fixing it up. Once restored, it would become the Foundation's first training vehicle, helping others learn basic car maintenance. As Rose parked her Civic and walked toward her apartment, a cool breeze carried the scent of blooming flowers. She remembered those dark morning walks, how she used to feel alone with her struggles. Now she understood that nobody truly walked alone. There were always people ready to help, if only we had the courage to share our stories and accept their support with grace. The Step Forward Foundation had become more than just a way to help people with transportation needs. It had become a testament to the power of community, a reminder that every person's journey mattered, and proof that sometimes the biggest obstacles in life could become stepping stones to something greater than we ever imagined.